Hello, 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 and welcome to the CLAYSTATION podcast. My name is Sean Jackson, and you're listening to the CLAYSTATION podcast today. We have a lovely special guest artist with us today, and that is Minna Graham. Welcome to the show, Minna.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. It's finally good to get this show back up and running. The past month or so, there's been a lot of public holidays, and everyone's schedules have been busy. So I'm really glad that we actually had a chance to meet online and talk and actually meet face to face, even though it is online.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to chat with you.
Cheers. Okay, we were just mentioning earlier that outside, in case of people listening, you might see a bit of noise coming through my microphone. There's actually a guy on a leaf blower. So, I do apologise about that, but hopefully he won't be going for too much longer. Okay, so we were just discussing before we started this up that because I'm from Gosford and your background originally from up in Newcastle way, a
That's
lot of
right.
stuff on your resume, and from what people know, you've been based in Victoria for a long time. How did you merge from being up in Newcastle to making your way down south?
Well, I got dragged south by my family when I was quite young. So a lot of my extended family, my parents are both born in Newcastle. All my extended families from Newcastle and Maitland in that area. And when I was around 7, we moved down to the Snowy Mountains in New South Wales for a time, for about 10 years. Although we had a strong connection still in Newcastle, we'd visit all the time, as all my grandparents and cousins were up that way. So I sort of had a foot in both camps for 10 years or so. And then when I was 17 and finished high school, I moved back to Newcastle and went to uni up in Newcastle and studied music for years, and then eventually decided to uproots again and did my early 20s traveling around Australia and in the back of a van, and met a lot of people on the way who were a lot of them based in around Melbourne, and because I guess I'd made a bit of a friendship group in my late teens, early 20s, early adulthood. I ended up sort of following them all back to Melbourne and put some roots down in Melbourne. And then growing up in the country, I, couldn't survive too long in the city. So found a nice place just about an hour and a half outside of Melbourne in a beautiful little town called Daylesford, which is quite a tourist town now. You've probably all heard of it. And yeah, so I settled here because it's such a beautiful place. It did remind me a lot of places that I'd grown up and spent a lot of my childhood in. So had a lot of connections here to both the land and the people. So just sort of ended up here, really.
Awesome. Because I'm personally I haven't been down Victoria way that much. Are there a lot of I know there's a lot of potters down south, but how many are around your area, or do you feel you're the only one, or that?
No, there is quite a few. Oh gosh, so many
And
actually.
this is
I
in
could probably.
Daylesford, that's correct.
That's right. Yeah, Daylesford and around. I can think of probably 15 to 20 potters that I know of in my extended area off the top of my head, and there'd be more all the time. And as you know, ceramics is becoming quite popular now. So we're gathering the potter population more and more as time goes by. But yeah, so many so that myself and a bunch of friends who are also potters started a co-op probably about 15 years ago, which was called Clayspace, Daylesford Region Ceramics Cooperative. That's no longer running as a co-op, but it still does run as a business. One of the founding members still keeps that going, and classes are taught privately and that kind of thing from there, as far as I know. But the co-op ran as a co-op for over 10 years. I think maybe 13 years in the end. We ran we ran it for, both professional and amateur potters. That was very successful, and really fantastic. Yeah, it really, it was really great networking for me in my early potting days as well. So yeah, it's a very rich potting culture in this area, which I really love. Yeah, and that just happened for me. I didn't design it that way. I certainly didn't move here for the ceramicists in the area. It just panned out nicely, I guess you can say.
Yeah, it's awesome where life brings you throughout its own journey. Uh,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Do you feel like being in Daylesford with quite a few potters around each other? Do you feel you sort of bounce off each other, like projects and ideas, or do you feel you all sort of develop your own um, pathways of ideas and projects?
I think a bit of both. I think there's definitely some similarities between a few of us. And I guess that's probably because a lot of us did our training in the same place, which was a place in Ballarat that course is no longer running. So there was a connection there to begin with when I first started out, and I guess that's how Clayspace came about. The ceramics cooperative that I was involved in came about, was because we're all sort of training together and all living in a similar area, and we decided, to pull some resources a little bit, start a bit of a community spirit. Back then, I guess ceramics was in a real lull. It was sort of that very post 70s pottery. Nobody really knew what ceramics and pottery was. It's only just started, the past 5 years really making that resurgence. So yeah, we're on a bit of a mission to bring pottery to the people and the community and get other people involved and, support local artists and all that kind of thing. So yeah, now not as much, although there is a small group of sort of the founding members of the co-op, and myself. I'm also a founding member, and we get together fairly regularly and catch up, and we're probably more friends than anything now. We do talk a bit of pot, but not heaps and heaps. Something I'd really like to get going a little bit more is artist talks and a little bit of a feedback session and a work through our work session where we can all bring meet and bring a piece and discuss it, or bring an idea and discuss it. That's something I've had in the back of my head for a while that I've been wanting to do. But at the moment, I think we're all quite busy and fairly busy doing our own thing. Yeah, in the past we built a wood kiln as the co-op, which is at the Daylesford Neighbourhood Centre. So that's a community kiln. We did have a ceramic studio, and we had a gas kiln in there as well, and we had wheels and a bit of a shared studio space that we rented and allowed people to use wheels and things. But that's now being run as a private studio, although
Right.
it is, I think, still accessible to those that want to go down that path. So yeah, a little bit of both, I'd say, to answer the question. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's really advantageous to people, um, especially like people like myself who don't have a kiln, or others who are very new in ceramics, and they're wanting to learn. For people who want to learn the proper industry of ceramics, not just like not to just become a hobby potter, but actually learn how to actually become a profitable business, and how to actually make a strong direction as a career in ceramics, and not just something on the side. But there's no harm in that as well. But there's
Yeah.
for those
Yeah.
who want to become develop a solid foundation and move forward and progress forward, um, both within their own physical skills and also within their academic skills. I think that's something greatly needed, especially in Australia with our such a small industry that we have here, and
Yeah.
the fact that you're all able to bounce off each other a little bit. That's very
Yeah.
advantageous.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And actually, just thinking about it, we probably do more than maybe I take it a little bit for granted. I'm just thinking now, I've been messaging backwards and forwards with an ex-student of mine who lives in this area, who's sort of uh, upscaling a little bit, and she was asking me how about moving this kiln and how do we do it. And so there's a lot of advice that I can give and ideas that I can give her, and I do try and help people if they're looking for somewhere to work or to fire. I can provide a bit of a firing service or a little bit of advice here and there. I've got a friend who's just starting out and she wants to learn, so she comes to my studio and uses the space a little bit and helps me out, but learns at the same time. So yeah, there actually is probably more than I think, and it's a wonderful thing.
Well, yourself as an individual is a great inspiration to a lot of us. So I do appreciate you just sharing
Oh,
some
thank
basic
you.
stuff here today. Thank you.
Shucks.
That's all right. Wipe the sweat off later. It's okay.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So back. Let's go back a little bit in your background again. We mentioned how you
Sure.
went from up my ways down south to there, and
Yep.
what age did that happen? And there's a progress from your ceramics, I guess, career from what I can see, like from what your CV says to me. It sort of started a couple of years before 2009 when you graduated your diploma, and then later on you went to do your bachelor in fine arts as well. And before all of that, I want to sort of see where all this inspiration into ceramics started. Do you feel you had some inspiration or some sort of
Yeah,
artistic
definitely.
skills
Yeah.
from your family, or did you feel it
Yeah,
started in
definitely.
high school?
No, definitely from my family. I grew up in a very rich environment. I grew up in the bush, in the Snowy Mountains. My parents are both artists. My mother's a sculptor and printmaker. My father was a sculptor, and predominantly a sculptor, but he did a lot of other stuff as well. He was the head of the art department at the local art school in the Snowy Mountains. So he taught everything. He taught everything from life drawing to printmaking to some ceramics, which he took up later in life. Yeah, he taught everything basically, and my mum did a lot of teaching as well. But both my parents are professional artists. My brother's also a sculptor. Um, so I guess I grew up after school going to the art department where mum and dad were either working or teaching or doing something creatively, and I had to wait until they'd finished work, and sometimes there was night classes, so we'd be there until late, and there was people around busy making their art and learning their art. But part of the art department, there was a ceramic studio right next door to that, so I sort of had free range of all of that, and I used to go into the ceramic studio and play with all of the recycled clay, and it was all after hours, so I would have this enormous room all to myself with half a dozen wheels, and I just played and played and played. So it was always around me. My dad did a lot of he did some wheel ceramics, but mostly a lot of hand building and sculpture in ceramics as well. We also had a rich network of family friends who were all artists in some way. One close family friend was a potter. A couple actually were potters. So our house was chock-a-block full of amazing paintings, prints, sculpture, ceramics, everything, you name it. So it's always been a really big part of my life, I guess, and it just made sense. I think I was probably 26 or 27 when I started out potting seriously, and my children were quite small. I think my youngest was 3, 2.5 or 3, and I was single parenting, and I was really looking for something to sink my teeth into.
The best age to start.
Yeah, that's right. Just something to do that, I could build on, that wasn't just parenting, something for myself. And I saw the Diploma of Ceramics course that was at Ballarat Uni at the time, and it just made sense. And I thought, of course, why haven't I thought of that before? So I applied and got in, and the rest is history. I just fell in love with it, and it gets you, doesn't it? Ceramics, it grabs you and pulls you in, and that's that. Yeah, there's no
Yes,
going
that
back.
ceramics bug really pulls you in.
Yeah, it sure
Becomes
does.
addictive.
Yeah, really. Yeah, it really, really does. And I was lucky to have fantastic teachers while I was there. I did my diploma over 4 years. I did it part time. Um, but the way the course was structured was that you had some formal classes, but you could access the studio as many days a week or as long as you wanted. So um, even though I did the formal classes over 4 years, it meant I had all that studio time and access to all the glaze materials and all the glaze technology, as well as, all the materials I wanted and the kilns that I wanted to use. And it was very open. So I feel extremely lucky to have the tuition and the support and the time that I had to put into my learning. I was very fortunate, really, to get that training before it all shut down. And those courses just aren't available anymore. So I do feel really grateful for the training that I got and the
Yes,
teachers that I
definitely.
had. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Do you feel that at that time, because I don't know what your ceramics looked like at that time, but do you feel you have a similar style to what you're doing now at that time, or how do you feel where your
Um,
current? I don't want to say what they look like, but I want to say what you think they look like.
Yeah, I think my earlier work, there's definitely shades of my earlier work in the work that I do now. There's certain things, a certain aesthetic that I've always been really drawn to. Um, and I guess in terms of of what inspires me, um, which is generally nature. I live very close to the earth. And I sort of live and breathe the earth, really. And so that's what my work reflects. That my work reflects the seasons, and what we do to live within those seasons. All our heating is from fire, so we cut a lot of wood, which means collecting the wood and cutting the wood, and there's we're outdoors all the time, so there's mud and rain and teeming water and lots of moss. And I think when you live so closely to the earth, you do feel a connection to it, and you notice things that you wouldn't ordinarily notice. So I guess I've always had that as my inspiration and influence underlying, and I guess I've just built on that over time. Um, So there's definitely reflections of that in my earlier work. I feel like I've probably refined that quite a bit in the past 10 years in particular, but also I've kind of undone a lot of my hang-ups and accepted a lot more how it is that I work. I think there was a lot of focus when I was training about technique and perfection and symmetry and getting everything just perfect. I always really struggle to work that way because A, it's not my aesthetic. B, I am naturally quite experimental, a little bit slapdash. Um, I work with a bit of an attitude of it'll be right. I'll give it a go and see what happens. And I really enjoy what that brings. I really enjoy the playfulness and um, I guess I like to push boundaries, and there's a freedom in
Mm.
that for me. So I've really learned to accept that is part of how I work. I've really learned to accept that I can make work that's perfectly symmetrical and round, but I don't enjoy it and I don't like it and I don't want to make work like that. So I've really learned to accept that I like to be free with my work. I like to really push and pull things around. I always alter pieces if they're round. It just doesn't look right to me. So I really do enjoy a bit of more of a rustic nature. And I've really learned to come to terms with that. So I think that's how my work differs now. I think when I was starting out and when I was training, I was very much caught up in trying to do it the right way. if that
Mm.
makes sense. Yeah.
Well, that is kind of important, I think, in the early days as one develops their own foundational skills in ceramics. And then
I think you're right. Yeah.
once those foundational skills are developed, then we can sort of start to grow within our own means or whatever directions or branches we start to grow off of that. Um, but no, I think that's awesome. With that starting
Yeah.
point was, did
I
you?
think you're right though. I think it is important to have a good grounding and a good foundation and a good knowledge of you know, a range of aspects of ceramics. I think that can give your work an integrity as well as a functional integrity if that's what you do, if you make functional work.
Mm,
Yeah, I think it's quite important to have that foundation and a skill base as well. Yeah.
did you do any travel, and do you feel you've been inspired by certain specific types of ceramics?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of traveling with my family. We travel overseas probably once a year, not at the moment, of course, but generally we do a lot of traveling. We travel to some really interesting, weird and wacky and wonderful places. I've done some training in Japan as well, which was definitely an influence for me, and it did really help me to uh, free myself from, um, having to make things the right way. I think once I'd learned to make things the right way, what I experienced in Japan um, really allowed me to undo some of that and work in my way. It really gave me a huge sense of freedom. So that was a really big influence. Uh, I definitely am inspired by a lot of Asian ceramics, Chinese, Korean, Japanese ceramics. I love how steeped in history their craft is. Um, I love a lot of traditional stuff as well as contemporary stuff. I just think their understanding of ceramics and that history that they have with it and the reverence they have for their craft is really quite profound, and that's something that I just am really drawn to. Um, when we travel, I do try and seek out potters or potteries or potting villages, depending on where we are. Spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia and always try and seek out a little potting village. And they're usually quite far flung, so it's difficult to get there. But when you do, it's just fantastic. So I'm quite inspired by a lot of those sort of primitive firings and, earthenware, very highly functional and utilitarian sort of cooking pots and earthenware plates and things that are just made very quickly, fired very quickly, used until they run out very quickly, and then they go back into the earth and it all begins again. I love the way that work is just purely existing for a purpose, and that's all. And some of it's quite beautiful in its naivety and very, very simple, but really lovely, and there's no airs and graces about it. It just, there it is, there's a plate, you use it, then it dies, then you make another one out of the earth. And I just think that's really wonderful. Probably my biggest influence with travel is landscapes. Again, I think it's just the one thing I draw on constantly in my work is nature and landscapes. Mountains to me are just incredible. And so a lot of my work is based around mountains and landscapes. And I guess it's not a literal translation at all either. It's just shapes, clouds, water and colours that really stick in my mind. And I try and sort of evoke those feelings really more than anything in my work. I've usually got something in mind that when I'm working, and whether that's mountains or rivers or just these sort of really inspiring big landscapes, usually in the back of my mind when I work.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that does come across when people are able to understand that from your point of view. I think that
Yeah.
definitely is able to translate well across. Um, Going back, you mentioned you did a bit of training in Japan or travel in
Yeah.
Japan.
Yeah.
Whereabouts? Was it one location or different locations in Japan that you were at?
So mainly mostly one location. So in Kyushu province, down around the Karatsu region. So I was predominantly looking at Karatsu wear, so a lot of tea wear, which is sort of where tea came into Japan via Korea, China via Korea as well. So there's a lot of really, really old kiln sites there that still have shards that are, 600 to 800 years old, and a lot of the porcelain wars started around there as well. So there's really rich history of ceramics. It's really, really revered. Tea is very revered and still used as a social mechanism there. Yeah, and there's a particular style. So I was lucky enough to be able to visit several National Living Treasures studios and kilns and see how they worked, and a lot of
Whereabouts in Kyushu were you?
so around Karatsu is the name of
Yeah.
the city town. It's it's a large town really, or a small city, and probably an hour or so from that is a small town called Takio. So I was out there with a guy who just runs really small workshops for 10 people or so. That they're about 2 weeks long, and he just runs them once every couple of years, I think. So yeah, I've done that twice, and he does tours around to introduce you to potters, and has some really fantastic experiences lined up there. He's American, but he's been living there for, I don't know, maybe 15 or more years now. He's dedicated his life to learning Karatsu wear and the Karatsu tradition, and to learn about tea and tea ceremony. I'd already had a bit of a connection with tea and tea ceremony from a friend of mine who used to work from Melbourne and had a tea importing business, and she was learning tea ceremony. When I first started out, she commissioned a whole bunch of tea bowls and teapots and things from me, and that really sparked an interest in tea for me. So it was all quite serendipitous, really. I didn't necessarily plan any of it. I just have a bit of a theory that if I say yes to opportunity that comes my way, then it'll keep coming my way and it'll take me in different directions. So generally, if somebody brings something to me and says, hey, what about this? Can you help me with this? Or are you interested in that? I'll try and say yes if I can. Because it does take me to some really interesting places. So I guess that's how it all came about. Yeah. But going back to Japan, also spent a little bit of time in Shigaraki, just outside of Kyoto, having a poke around there and just getting a feel for the different styles in the different regions of Japan. Visited some fantastic places within Tokyo and Kyoto, just exhibitions and things like that, and just looked a lot. I just looked at as much as I could while I was there, both commercial and handmade ceramics, and yeah, it was a really wonderful experience. Just fantastic.
That's awesome. Awesome. What sort of time period was this over? Over a year or a couple of years? Or
Sorry, what was that?
was this like over a year or a couple of years?
It was over. Oh, I can't think now. Maybe I think I went twice within 3 or 4 years to do that course, or that series of workshops, to Japan, that is. But then within that time as well, I visited other places like Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Those two in particular, actually, Sri Lanka and Myanmar have a really great pottery tradition of sort of, more primitive earthenware, utilitarian sort of ceramics that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, so I really got a lot out of both of those places, as well as Indonesia. They have a similar sort of way of making as well. Yeah, yeah. So
That's
that was all within
awesome.
the same time, I think. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's so nice to hear your experience, especially like in the southern southwestern parts of Japan, like in Kyushu, because as you mentioned, a lot of those areas were affected from different times in history, and
Mm.
especially from China and Korea, and a lot of those. Won't go too much of those details, but
Yeah, it's a very
but
complicated
yeah.
history. There's a lot to it. Yeah. And I don't profess to know a great deal, just bits and pieces, but you learn what you learn as you go.
I just try not to get into
Yeah.
arguments with Japanese about it because my wife's
Yeah.
Japanese.
Yeah.
but
Good idea. Yeah.
um, yeah, I love some of the techniques down there because I've spent a bit of time down there myself as well. I love a lot of the
Yeah, right.
techniques brought across and merged, especially with the use of slips and also natural materials like ash glazes and stuff like that. And I love that your work also encompasses a lot of those techniques, and then how you've reapplied or translated that into your own version within Australia. And as you mentioned, you use those techniques to convey your notions of landscape and your own, I guess, your own version of poetry in Australia. but
Yeah. And I think also I was already using a lot of the techniques and glazes that I'm still using now. I think um, seeing and feeling how sort of natural materials, raw materials like ash glazes and things were being used there really gave me, really confirmed or affirmed that I was on my right path. So it really
mm,
just solidified my confidence in what I was doing, I guess, and really allowed me to just go, yep, I'm I'm doing what I love and what I want, and that's okay. That's, go for it, sort of thing. So yeah, that it did really help me to just, you know, uh, yeah, just to go forward with gusto and go for it. Yeah.
that's awesome. I'm personally a sucker for materials.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular types of clays that you like working with, or do you make your own clay, or do you develop your own glazes, or what sort of
Yep.
techniques are you um, more prone into using or use on a regular basis?
Yeah, so I make all my own glazes. I buy commercial raw materials, as well as commercial clays, sorry, and then I mix them all myself to create new blends. So with clays, I buy commercial clays that are manufactured in Melbourne, um, and then I mix them together in different ratios to create clays that are quite unique to me. Sometimes I add, where we live, there's a lot of mineral springs on our property, and I'm lucky enough to have great clay deposits as well. So I do add in some wild clays from the property into my commercial clays, just to make it a bit more interesting, to make it a bit more unique. Um, it depends what I'm doing. I don't tend to make too many blends that are exactly the same. They change from batch to batch quite a bit because I'm not a measurer. I just chuck things in generally. Um, I do it all by guesswork really. When I mix my glazes, of course I measure, but I'm a little bit rough with that too. So there is a lot of variation from batch to batch, but I really enjoy that aspect. I don't ever want to be somebody who makes identical work. I really love the fact that even if two pieces are a similar size, similar amount of clay, and the same style cup, for example, I love the fact that they'll still be quite different. Um, yeah, I don't make matching pieces. I really enjoy that. Um, but in terms of glazes, I mix my own glazes. I sort of have a palette of about half a dozen glazes that I've developed over the years. There's two of them in particular that I use religiously because I love them so much. Um, one of them took me 3 years. Actually, both of them took me roughly 3 years to develop. And I managed to do that while I was still studying. And it's part of the reason why I went back to do a period of the fine arts degree as well, so that I could have access to the materials and the time, that focused time, and the kilns, to really get those glazes right, which I feel like I've done for now. So that's pretty nice. I'm always experimenting with new glazes though. I have some glaze knowledge, but I'm not certainly, not a glaze master. I have a small amount of glaze knowledge, enough to be able to mess around and make a few glazes that I really, really enjoy. I don't use anything that can't be thrown on the ground. So there's a lot of materials that I steer clear of, because all our water ends up, back on the property. I have to be really careful about what we put into our system. So the only thing really that I use in small amounts is a little bit of cobalt and a little bit of manganese. And the amount is so minimal that it's okay to use and dispose of. So generally I try and stick to really natural, simple materials and recipes. I do use some iron oxide that's on our property as well. I mentioned before that we have a lot of natural springs on the property, and we also have a lot of terracotta, which is fairly iron rich. So we have a lot of, when the springs are running in the right season, a lot of iron oxide that just floats to the surface, and I can scrape it off. It sort of is a bit like a kind of a scum on the surface, and I can just collect it and then let the water evaporate off, and then I can use the iron. So I use a little bit of that from time to time in decorating and adding back in, which is pretty lovely. A great resource. I probably don't harness the natural resources enough that I have here, but I plan to in the future. Yeah, it's something that I'd really love to play with more. Yeah.
Well, that's the lovely thing about Australia. We have so many natural resources, and we're never short of iron in Australia. So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Do you primarily wood fire or gas fire?
I gas fire, but I fire in a way that has aspects of wood firing. It makes it look wood fired. I would love to have a wood kiln, and again, I have grand plans to build one. We have the space, we have the wood here to be able to do that. I just haven't got around to doing it yet. So I've just sort of developed glazes and firing techniques that allows my work to have that beautiful wood-fired aesthetic, because I really do love it. Yeah, so I fire a very, very heavy reduction. I pack my kiln really, really tightly, and I allow carbon to build up so that I get beautiful carbon trapping colours. And my ash glaze really enjoys that carbon build up and the really heavy reduction, so that I can mimic those beautiful looking effects from wood firing. And one day I'll have a beautiful Nabori Gamma, I think, on the side of my hill outside my studio.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ditto on that. I'm in the same boat. I have to follow you a bit more closely to see which steps I need to follow down.
Oh God, yeah, I'm not there yet, but yeah, one day. Yeah.
That's it. But as long as we're always making progress within our own journeys, I think that's important. It's good to have those goals to aspire to and to work towards. And if things don't work out, we just keep trying something new to get towards that goal. That's awesome. I thought you were actually firing wood firing at the moment, but I imagine being in surrounded by quite a few other potters, there would be those community wood kilns being fired around, would there?
Not so much here. As I mentioned before, the co-op that I was involved in did build a bourrie box, a French-style wood-fired kiln at the neighbourhood centre. That does give you less ash deposits, and that's been fired a number of times, but it is a team effort. You're right. It does take a lot of effort and a lot of people to manage that. And we haven't done one for a few years now. We just haven't. I think everybody's been just busy doing their own thing, so there hasn't been a community firing for a while. And that's the only wood kiln that I know of in the area. Oh, there is another one actually, but it's a privately owned one, and that's sort of a bit further out. So yeah, not so many in this area. Not so many wood firers in this area, unfortunately. But I think there's plenty of us that are interested in it. That in the future, it definitely could be something that people would get on board with. I'll have to keep my ear to the ground on that one. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. I was actually wanting to ask you how much wood you would go through on your firings, as it could always range from three, like basic wood-fired kiln would be like 3 to 5 ton or something like that. But depending on the size of the kiln and also the different firing processes, some people might fire up to 7 days or whatever, from 2 or 3 days to 5 days, 7. Everyone's got their different processes and techniques, and
That's right.
different
Yeah.
kilns. But
Yeah.
I really hope that you're able to continue to develop that and build that kiln on your property
I
one
look
day. I
forward to
truly
that.
hope so.
Yeah. I look forward to it, and I'll keep you posted if and when I get there.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm
Awesome.
sure I will.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
Okay. So with all the craziness that's been happening from last year, I just wanted to see how things are going for you at the moment. Are you back to normal, or do you think there's still a lot of restrictions out your way in the bush?
No, there's no restrictions out here, and there haven't been for some time. So it's sort of throughout the COVID lockdowns, it was pretty interesting. I found that I was selling a lot online in particular. Of course, mostly online. And sales didn't really go down at all for me, which was surprising, actually, really surprising. So I didn't do a great deal of making. I actually had major spinal surgery last year as well, which was a bit of a shock. So I did have probably 5 months where I wasn't making anything. I was just in recovery. But through that time, I was still selling quite a bit. So I have a fairly high output of work, so I do have a lot of stock. So I am able to not work sometimes for a few months if we go away, or if something like that happens. I have enough stock that I can just sort of keep going and then play catch up later. So at the moment I'm playing catch up, but I'm also when you say back to normal, it's far beyond normal. I actually can't keep up at the moment. I've got an enormous amount of commissions and orders, as well as a few other projects, sort of more retail projects, and developing some new teaware for a new place that's opening up in Melbourne. It's actually gone a bit crazy, especially in the past, since the beginning of the year. Actually, it's just gone crazy. Everybody has such a huge appetite for ceramics and handmade work at the moment.
Awesome.
So yeah, I can't keep up.
Well, I guess
problem.
that is I would count that as a good thing. I think it's a very good step, and it definitely helps you work towards your dreams as well. So I wouldn't be complaining about that.
No,
sort of
not
grateful
at
to
all.
the situation.
I feel very grateful, very lucky that I can make a good living off my art. I know it hasn't always been that way, but I think sometimes if you stick at something for long enough, then and if you take that leap of faith to do what you want to do, then put in the hard work, it'll pay off, definitely. Yeah.
Yes. I think back to your work again. I think one key identifier of your work would be the faceting.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Does that come from the karatsu background, or did you sort of develop that down your own experimentation?
Yeah, definitely well before any Japanese influence. I've been doing that from day dot, really, and
Mm.
to be really honest, it's born from laziness. I really dislike turning pots. There's something about that process that I just find really tedious. And so I thought, okay, if that's an aspect of my craft that I really don't like, then I need to find another way. So I did, and I really love carving. I could just carve away a block of clay into nothing and scrunch it up and start again. I just find it so calming and meditative and satisfying. Yeah, I really enjoy the human mark that it leaves as well. So yeah, I've just developed this way of carving because I love not only the textural qualities of it, but I love the process of it more than the alternative, which is turning. Um, I love the I love the shapes it gives me. I love having a round pot with sharp edges, with these triangulated bases and more geometric shapes. So I just really enjoy trying to make a traditional and simple object a different way, or to make it interesting and to make it lovely to use and to hold. And I also really love the connection and the idea that wherever my pieces go in the world, somebody else will touch the very same place that I have. And each of my pieces is touched so much because I do hand carve every single piece. So yeah, I really love that idea of little threads leading from me to anywhere in the world. That's really exciting to me, especially in this digital age, in this age of disconnection. I really like the idea of being connected in some way. So yeah, I think all of those things feed into that technique for me. Yeah.
I think that
Yeah,
since you've explained today that a lot of your work has a notion of landscape to it, I think that ties into that notion quite well. As you see in nature, because I'm a big fan of geology and the different layers and geology, but you see it out in nature in the landscapes. I guess from your experience in the snowy mountains as well, you'd see like different jagged edges and boulders of rocks and all kinds of stuff, and that sort of
definitely.
would be sort of swimming around in the back of your head, even maybe even subconsciously while you're doing these things, and this all ties into
Yeah,
each other.
definitely.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
lovely.
And often I don't, often I make something, and once it's made, I realize what it is that I've made. So I don't often go into a piece thinking, right, this piece is going to be about that mountain or about that lake. But I'll sit with it for a while, and then I'll see it and think, oh, that's where that came from, or that's what that's what that is, that's autumn, or that's this, or that's that view out the window. And a lot of it is really subconscious. And I think if you can leave your mind open enough while you're working and use it as a bit of a meditative process and allow thoughts and ideas to shift in and out, I think you also, it's like opening it or filling a void. Things will just come, and things inside you will just come out because they have to. um, yeah, I kind of really like the idea of allowing that sort of retrospective concept as well, if that makes sense at all, a retrospective concept. But I do find that happens often to me. I'll be working on certain pieces. I think the first time I really noticed that was I was working on a series of plates that had quite a light blue glaze with some copper flashes and blushes through it, and I imprinted some branches into the clay, um, and then sort of filled them with a copper wash and wiped it back, and then covered it in this very light blue glaze. And I was looking out my bedroom window after I'd made these pieces, and it was autumn, and I realized that I was looking through some pink blushing leaves to this pale blue sky, and I immediately thought of the plates that I'd been making and thought, oh, that's what I'm doing. You know, I look at this view every single day, and it's in there somewhere. And without even intending to or realizing it, I just transferred that onto the canvas of the plate, you know, and I think, oh, of course, you know, I think we don't always need necessarily to push our ideas forward to the forefront to make them, in order to make them. I think if you allow it, they'll come anyway. I like that sort of natural progression of ideas, I guess, is what it is. I'm not sure if I've articulated that very well, but you get
No,
the
that's
gist of it.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we might uh start to wrap it up. I do thank you so much for coming today.
My
Pe-
pleasure.
People can contact you on your Instagram. That is
Yes,
Minna Graham, just as Minna Graham. So
that's it.
MINNA GRAHAM. Very easy to find.
Yes,
You also have your own direct personal professional website, which is minnagrahamceramics.com. Is that correct?
that's right. Yep.
Awesome. I'm glad I got that
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. That's it.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us today. I might wrap it up there, and I hope I get a chance to talk with you more in depth at a later point in time.
I look forward to it, and thanks again for the opportunity. It's really wonderful to be able to talk talk it all through. It's helpful as well for me. So thanks again.
No worries. The honor's all mine. I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Bye, Sean. Take care.